Good morning. I'm speaking on Treaty 6 territory, and I acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection to this land. Yesterday, media reported that Danielle Smith's staff have in fact directly interfered in ongoing criminal prosecutions, and that there are documents to prove it. These are extremely serious allegations. These reports follow a series of reversals, contradictions, and lies from Danielle Smith and her office. Let me go through a quick recap. With respect to charges related to COVID restriction violations, on December 23rd, Danielle Smith told a far-right website on camera, quote, "Now I put it to the prosecutors, and I've asked them to do a review of the cases with those two things in mind, and I'm hopeful that we'll see a true turning of the page," end quote. The two things Smith is referring to is whether or not prosecution is in the public interest and has a reasonable likelihood of conviction. These are the standards every prosecutor applies to every case. And for the Premier to contact a prosecutor and remind them of their responsibilities is political interference. Then on January 12th, speaking to the media, Danielle Smith said, quote, "I ask them on a regular basis as new cases come out, is it in the best interest to pursue, and is there a reasonable likelihood of conviction?" End quote. Again, this is an open admission of political interference by Danielle Smith. Following widespread outrage, the Premier's story suddenly changed. And she stated in writing that she had only raised these cases with Attorney General Tyler Shandro and Deputy Attorney General Frank Basha. This is no better. For the Premier to lean on the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General is political interference. This is exactly what occurred in the SNC-Lavalin case, which Smith herself said warranted an independent investigation. On Tuesday, my colleague Irfan Sabir wrote to Attorney General Shandro and formally requested that he appoint an independent investigator. There is recent precedent for this. Shandro's UCP predecessor commissioned an investigation into her UCP predecessor, Casey Madhu. Retired Justice Adele Kent found that Madhu had attempted to interfere in the administration of justice by calling the Edmonton police chief to discuss a traffic ticket he got. Madhu was sacked as Attorney General as a result, but he should have been ejected from cabinet altogether. But we're not just talking about interference in charges related to violations of COVID restrictions today. The cases that Smith's office is now alleged to have interfered in are far more serious. Some of these charges relate to conspiracy to murder police officers. The Premier herself, in her words, has repeatedly stated that she has interfered in prosecutions. Now, media reports that staff in Smith's office have sent emails to prosecutors questioning their judgment and their decision to proceed with charges. Let me be clear. This UCP chaos is completely unacceptable in a democracy. The public must have confidence that prosecutions are not influenced by whether the accused have friends in the Premier's office. Premier Smith must appear in public today, identify who in her office has sent these emails, and confirm that that person has been dismissed. But we've also not received a response from Tyler Shandro, and so I'm restating our call for him to launch an independent investigation today. Failing to do so and allowing this chaos to stand will cause profound damage to the rule of law in Alberta and our reputation around the world as a stable and mature democracy. The Premier and the Attorney General must act today. Thank you, and I'll take your questions.
And we'll start with questions in the room.
Hi, Julia Wong, CBC News. Just wanting to get more detail on the investigation that you would like the Justice Minister to launch, the parameters around that.
Well, we have some precedent for this. We did see that when former Attorney General Casey Madhu was accused of interfering in the administration of justice as it related to a traffic ticket, we saw that within 33 days, the UCP were able to appoint a former retired judge to actually do an investigation into what took place. That included interviews, looking at documents, and we're saying the same thing needs to be done now. We're not saying exactly who needs to be appointed, but we do think an independent investigator outside of the Ministry of Justice, outside of the UCP, needs to be appointed, who has that reputation of being independent and impartial, to look into precisely what happened here. We've heard so many conflicting stories, and right now the uncertainty around what has actually taken place, and now these more significant allegations and the evidence that apparently has come forward that there has been some communication between the Premier's office and prosecutors, that is completely undermining Albertans' faith in the rule of law. Albertans do not expect that their politicians will be able to say which charges will go ahead and who will be charged and with what. That is completely inappropriate, and it's creating chaos in people's understanding of the rule of law and democracy in Alberta. An independent investigation should be able to be done quickly, yes, long before an election ever takes place. We need to know what's happened here, and Albertans deserve that information.
And you yourself are a lawyer, and you've spoken to this a little bit, but wondering if you can share some feelings from that professional legal perspective.
Yeah, I am a lawyer, and I'm not a criminal lawyer and did not practice in criminal law, but I can say it almost goes without saying, I don't think you actually need to be a lawyer to understand what's happened here. The idea that charges could be laid or pursued as a result of political interference, or in this case, perhaps not be laid or be removed because a politician made a phone call or sent an email or somebody from their office did that, that completely flies in the face of how we understand the law to work. It needs to be, the law should be impartial. It should be based on the facts. It should be based on the judgment of the prosecutors who understand the law and its application. It should not be up to politicians to do that. I certainly want to reiterate, you do not need to be a lawyer to understand that. It's actually something that I think Albertans just naturally expect and anybody in a democracy would expect.
One more check for questions in person. And we'll go to the phone. Just a reminder to press *9 if you're joining us on the phone. Use the raise hand function if you're joining us via Zoom. If you can say your name and your outlet at the top, that would be great. We'll go to our first caller.
I was hoping you could give me your take on the statement the Office of the Premier has put out. She says she's not been in contact with Crown prosecutors, has no knowledge of anyone on her staff having done so, and adds if a staff member has been in touch with the Crown prosecutor, appropriate action will be taken. What's your reaction to that?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's kind of irrelevant whether or not it was the Premier herself or a member of her staff. If a Crown prosecutor is being contacted by somebody in the Premier's office, that prosecutor is going to rightfully assume that that person is doing so with the authority, with the knowledge, and with the influence of the Premier behind them. So there's no distinction, as far as I'm concerned, between a staff member in the Premier's office or the Premier herself doing it. This is critically important because whoever's receiving that communication, whichever prosecutor is receiving that, they're going to assume that that person is doing so with the blessing and with the encouragement and authority of the Premier. With respect to whether or not the Premier is going to take action against the individual who was responsible, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we are calling for an independent investigation. We believe it's critically important that Albertans know all the facts. But let's also be clear that if the Premier doesn't know what key members of her staff are doing, there's another problem going on with this Premier and her leadership in this province. This chaos cannot continue. We cannot have individual members of the Premier's staff going forward and calling prosecutors or emailing prosecutors. What does that say about her ability to run this government? The chaos in both her party, at her Premier's office apparently, and now what she's doing in terms of chaos around the province, that's bad for the rule of law, it's bad for democracy. It's also sending an incredibly damaging message to people across the country and across the world about bringing their business, bringing their investment, bringing their families and their skills to Alberta. We need to be projecting and telling the world that we are a stable, mature democracy where the people here understand the rule of law and they can expect that fairness. That is not the image that this current Premier is projecting out to the world.
Any follow-up, Matthew?
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
And we'll go to our next caller.
Hi there, this is Morgan Black calling from Global Edmonton. I'm just wondering if anyone within the NDP caucus has seen or obtained any of these emails that CBC also obtained.
We've only seen what was reported yesterday, which was the same as what Albertans have seen. We understand from the reporting, of course, that there is an email, perhaps more than one, we don't know, that was sent from a member of the Premier's office to prosecutors. That was not just an email contacting them, but allegedly, according to the reporting, the emails actually indicate that the member of the Premier's office was questioning and challenging the assessment and the actions of the prosecutor. So we have not seen these emails, and this is, again, one of the reasons why we are calling for an independent investigation. Albertans deserve to know, and somebody who is impartial and able to assess this should be able to determine see the content of those emails and get clarity around what exactly has taken place and if there in fact has been interference. Although I will say, again, as I mentioned in my opening comments, the Premier has already said on the record statements that make it clear she has interfered in prosecutions. She stated twice that she's spoken to prosecutors. She's also said she's spoken directly to the Attorney General and to the Deputy Attorney General. So that is already on the record. It's simply the content of the email now that we have not seen, but an independent investigation should get to the heart of that.
You follow up, Morgan?
Nothing further. Thanks all.
And we'll go to our next caller.
Hi, Rakhi. It's Dean from CP. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Hi, Dean.
Hey, my audio's working today. Can I ask you, I want to follow up something that Matthew was asking you. The statement from the Premier's office states that she had no knowledge, but it specifically doesn't state that they will take action to find out what's going on here. What do you make of that?
Well, I think we have seen actually repeatedly from this UCP a refusal to take action as necessary until there's public outrage about it. And so, I think it goes without saying that there must be some direct and immediate implications for whoever did send those emails. That goes without saying. To me, that's the basic starting point. But then, as I mentioned, it is equally as important that the Premier is held accountable if this, again, if there's an independent investigation and it's determined that there was this interference. The Premier is also accountable for this because a prosecutor receiving those contacts from the Premier's office would assume it is being done with the endorsement and with the authority of the Premier. So let's just be clear, Dean, there's absolutely no doubt that whoever did send those emails, and I assume that the Premier should know who that is, there needs to be ramifications immediately, but that is not the end of the story. We need to have an independent investigation to determine the totality of the responsibility and accountability here.
Any follow-up, Dean?
Thanks. What, if anything, can we do about the Coutts cases themselves? For example, we did have some charges dropped this week. We don't know if that was, we're assuming everything's above board on that, but what do we do with these cases now with all these comments and these emails? How does Alberta proceed with these cases?
Well, I have an enormous faith in our Crown prosecutors and the prosecution service to do what's right. But I think what you're speaking to, Dean, is precisely why this is such an issue. Because it calls into question the application of the rule of law, prosecutorial independence, that there is no political interference in the way charges are laid and administered, and this is precisely that level of uncertainty around what's happening around these charges or any charges. Let's be clear. We're now aware of this interference related to charges with the Coutts blockade, but any interference by politicians politicians or their staff into charges should raise the concern of Albertans because it does call into question that independence. So we need to make sure that's why we're calling for this investigation. We need to have that settled so that Albertans can have confidence to know that the law has been administered fairly here and in every circumstance.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. It's Lisa from the Journal. I just wanted to follow up on some stuff about the statement from the Premier's office about if necessary, appropriate action will be taken. What, in your mind, and I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but your background is in labor law, what would appropriate action be here? Are we calling for job termination?
Yes, we are. Actually, we are calling for job termination because whoever sent that email, that is a clear breach of the independence of the prosecution and undermining and attempting to interfere in the administration of justice. There's no doubt about it. I mean, certainly the Premier will have to, and their office will have to deal with that from an employment perspective the way is appropriate, but fundamentally, there should not be any person within the Premier's office who contacts a prosecutor and tries to influence the way charges are laid. That should be fundamental. So that is the beginning point. But as we said, and as I've said, there's no real distinction here when you're a prosecutor between a political staff member and the Premier herself. So there needs to be greater accountability, because just simply removing this one individual or terminating them from their position is not sufficient to actually provide the confidence to Albertans that they need, that the rule of law is being applied fairly, and that the Premier's office understands, and the Premier herself understands, that she cannot be interfering in these prosecutions.
Any follow-up, Lisa?
No, thank you very much.
And we'll go to our next caller.
Hi, it's Audrey Niver from Pancholi. Rakhi, I want to know, do you think that a new prosecutor should be assigned to the Coutts case given the perception of political interference with the administration of justice?
Sorry, Audrey, I couldn't quite hear your question.
Oh, sorry, there's a lot of noise in my newsroom. I'll say my question again. Do you think that a new prosecutor should be assigned to the Coutts case given the perception of political interference?
Well, you know, Audrey, we don't know yet, right? And that's, again, why we're calling for an independent investigation, because we don't know who sent the email and to whom. We don't know the precise contents of the email. We know what's been reported in the media. And we don't know whether or not, you know, the person who was contacted is the person who is currently responsible for prosecutions. We don't have any of that information yet. This is why the purpose of an independent investigation. I don't think it should be for politicians to be speculating, and I certainly do not believe that I should be stating about whether or not I think a new prosecutor should be applied. In my view, that is once again overstepping. We need to have some independence, and we need to have this investigation so that Albertans can have confidence in the way that the prosecution has proceeded and will be proceeding in these charges, but in all charges. And it's equally important that we drive home the message to this Premier and to this government that they cannot be interfering in the rule of law, that they cannot be interfering in the administration of justice, that by doing so, and the back and forth and the stories that have changed multiple times and now these emails, they are creating chaos. They're creating chaos with respect to our institutions, our democratic institutions, our legal institutions, and the perception that both Albertans and people outside Alberta have about the stability of this province and about the competence of their government. Right now, the message they're sending is that Alberta is a place of chaos and incompetence. We cannot have that continue. It's bad for Albertans. It's also bad for the future of our economic growth in terms of attracting people to live here and invest here. We cannot continue down this path. We need to begin with at least some transparency and accountability that must be done in an independent and impartial way.
Any follow-up, Audrey?
Yes, and CBC sources say that for months, the Attorney General and his office, so Minister Tyler Shandro, have been trying to stress the importance of the independence of the prosecutors to the Premier's office. Do you think that Tyler Shandro could have done something more here in this case?
I can't speak to, I don't know what efforts Tyler Shandro has made already. What I can say is, as the Attorney General of Alberta, he is responsible for protecting the rule of law. So if he has made efforts, I don't know what those are, but I can say that given what we've heard from the Premier and now the allegations around Premier's office staff, that the rule of law has not been protected and the Attorney General has not done that sufficiently to date. So this is, again, why we're restating that the Attorney General, Tyler Shandro, in his responsibility as the top lawyer in the province, as well as most responsible for the administration of justice and the law in Alberta, he is responsible. He should be appointing an independent investigator immediately to look into this. That is the step he can take immediately to protect the administration of justice and the administration of law here in Alberta.
We'll go to our next caller.
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me okay? It's Danielle Smith with the Globe and Mail.
I can, yep.
Okay, perfect. So just to follow up on some of my colleagues' questions, you're saying, it would be insufficient just to terminate that employee, whoever, allegedly sent these emails. So I'm wondering if you would go so far as to call for Shandro and or Smith's resignation, I guess, as more details come to light.
Well, I think the key there is that we need to have that independent investigation to look into it, because we're now all speculating as to perhaps what the Attorney General has done or not done already. We have mixed messages and different stories from the Premier herself about what she has done, and now we have evidence of what's been done from the Premier's staff. So ultimately, this goes back to why we need to have an independent investigation. And we can do that. The UCP government has shown that they can do that in a timely manner if they want to. You know, with Justice Adele Kent, when she looked into Casey Madhu, that investigation was completed in just over 30 days. So we believe that can be done again, and has to be done now, so that we can get some clarity and some answers to determine who is ultimately accountable and what action is appropriate to take.
Any follow-up, Alana?
No, thank you. That's all I have.
And that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.